The following is a production of Different Brains. Visit us at differentbrains.org.
In this episode of Exploring Different Brains.
For me, it was not having the right support in place to help me, and asking for help but feeling unheard, and just continuing to grind away with like administrative stuff piling up, and it got to be so overwhelming, and money was rolling in. It was great, but then there was just this whole other side that I couldn't deal with, and it cost me. It cost me a lot.
Hello there, I'm Dr. Hackey Reitman. Welcome to another episode of Exploring Different Brains. And today I'm excited to have coming to us all the way from Canada. There he is, our good friend Shawn Smith from up in Canada, who's going to tell us all about neurodivergence. Hi, Shawn.
Hey, Hackey. Happy to be here.
Good to see you. Could you reintroduce yourself to our viewers?
Sure. I'm Shawn Smith. I'm the founder of Don't Diss My Ability. I'm an autistic ADHD therapist, specializing in helping uniquely gifted individuals who are often misunderstood. And so that's my kind of cheeky way of saying I work with other neurodivergent folks and their families. And all, I've been getting calls from all types of different people, Hacky, so it just keeps changing. Like I get calls from judges, doctors, lawyers. So as the movement progresses, more and more people are realizing that they're on the spectrum or they're neurodivergent and are reaching out. So it's kind of fascinating that way.
And thank you for being a central figure in spreading the word and helping all these people. Now, since we last spoke back in 2021, which is hard to believe that was so long ago, you who had a diagnosis of ADHD and other neurodivergencies, since then you've had a new diagnosis. It's called autism. Tell us how that came about.
Sure. And I'm an open book, Aggie, so I really don't mind sharing stories. It actually, I had this epiphany. So I was having these meltdowns, and what was interesting to me as a person, but also a therapist, was that recognizing that as a kid, I couldn't do that. And we can get into that in a little bit, but all of a sudden I'm having these meltdowns and realizing that as I'm having them, there's usually a moment of clarity that comes. There's an epiphany. And so I was getting ready to do a guest lecture for a university. I'd been up all night. I have chronic pain with my back. I was dehydrated, just this perfect storm of things, and just had this realization, why do I have such difficulty taking care of myself? Like, it just seems like such a simple, basic thing. And then the chips just started to kind of fall into place and realize, okay, I likely am on the spectrum. And, for my own, the real reason I did it was just for me to know personally, just to validate my, what I was thinking, but also a part of who I am now too, right? So that's kind of how it came about. Yeah.
I want to talk about today something we all experience, but you're a bit of an expert in, and it's burnout. Tell us about it.
Heck yeah, I wish I wasn't, to be honest. I think it's interesting too, because I think, what part is burnout and where does that pick up, and where does the autistic burnout kind of pick up, right? So for me, it was not having the right support in place to help me, and asking for help but feeling unheard, and just continuing to grind away with like administrative stuff piling up, and it got to be so overwhelming, and money was rolling in. It was great, but then there was just this whole other side that I couldn't deal with, and it cost me. It cost me a lot. I ended up having to take a lot of time off work. I whittled down my clients so that it was basically just, kind of a skeleton crew that I was seeing 3 or 4 people a week. And realized in hindsight, if I had just taken the time off and not seen those people, I probably would have been better off. But I think, as an entrepreneur, I'm very fortunate that I had money in the bank and I could have just taken that time off. For other people, that's not really something that they can do. So I'm very fortunate that way. But some of the things that I did that really kind of helped me, was seeing a doctor, going on antidepressants. I found this thing called hydration therapy, which is not new in the States, but it's new to us here, which is basically like you go to see a doctor and you get an IV, and there's different things that you can get in that IV that your body needs. And so doing that regularly, really kind of leaning into my hobbies and interests. Um, I had the account ADHD Chef. I've now changed it to Neurodivergent Chef, and just kind of like dug in on certain things that I was interested in. If we ever get to see each other again, I would happily make you like a restaurant quality style Neapolitan pizza, because that's the level I'm at now. Uh, and just trying to spend more time, like more quality time with my kids and my wife, but also like reaching out to friends. And because I think a lot of us feel like we're kind of like in isolation. Like a lot of us have friends, but we may not have like a close group of friends that we go for a beer with every week. So just being mindful of, it's not realistic for me to expect people to reach out to me and know what I'm going through if I haven't informed them first. So really looking at, who are the people that I feel comfortable reaching out to, that I can spend time with and do things with, and kind of leaning into all that. But one of the biggest things is time. It takes time.
Well, you're such a busy fellow, and so many different interests at the time you were cutting back. How did you do it? I mean, you said you did it and you said it was with difficulty, but for somebody who's doing a million different things and comes to the realization, I have to cut back or I'm in trouble.
Mhm.
What advice do you give them?
Well, for me, it was kind of a natural progression, just because I'm a therapist and people will, I might see someone for one session, I might see them for 3 years, right? So it was just kind of a natural progression of people ending our sessions together and me not taking anyone else on. And I had a list, and one of the tips and tricks that I had, I actually had it typed out for anybody who would inquire about counseling service. Like I had an email. Currently burnout at the moment, but we'll be taking on clients when I feel like I'm in recovery. And I said, please, I appreciate your patience. If you're interested in being added to my wait list, please let me know, and I'd be happy to do that. That's what I did. So I
Well,
just
so
was
you're very
very,
open about it.
oh
Very,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, my thing, Hack, is that like as a therapist, to expect someone to come and unload and share everything with me, but not share that side of myself, just doesn't seem genuine, authentic, right? So I wear my heart on my sleeve. If somebody wants to judge me for that, then I believe that actually says more about them than it does me.
And what about a lay person who's not a psychologist, who's not a therapist? Do you recommend they do the same thing?
Yeah, I don't think it's really any different. The only challenge I think a lot of people go through is that they don't have the flexibility that I did, where I'm an entrepreneur. So if you work for a company, there's more of a process that has to get involved. You've got to get a letter from your doctor. You need to go through human resources. There's a lot of steps that extra steps the layperson would have to go through, which I think would maybe make it more overwhelming or daunting to go through the process.
Well, but I'm thinking about, because I'm self-identifying too, with somebody like, say, myself, who's very busy and is on this committee and that Boys and Girls Club and that not-for-profit and a CEO of your company and not-for-profits and mentoring individuals, so on and so forth. Um, the same thing would apply. You just make the list and go through it.
I think the biggest thing is trying. I think the part that messes people up is that they get so overwhelmed that trying the simplest of things seems daunting and overwhelming, right? So I think The list, I think the bones of it are there, but I think it can be different for different people. But I think it's the act of trying something, right? If you try something, eventually something will stick. If you try nothing, there's nothing to stick.
That's good advice for anything in life, isn't it? That's good. It's a good philosophy. What age groups are you finding you're seeing the most of?
I'm getting a lot more professionals and university students. Um, Still working with families a little bit, but I would say those are kind of the two larger demographics that I'm working with right now.
And the more successful the professional, the more likely they are to be experiencing this, in your
Yeah.
experience?
Not necessarily. I think that, and again, I live in Canada, right? So the whole concept of neurodiversity is relatively new here. Like the government has only just started using the term within the last 6 months or a year, right? So that's how far behind we are. Um, so we still have this deficit-based mindset when it comes to disability, and so part of the challenge for me is helping people to understand that they're not damaged or broken, that they are whole. It's a system, or there have been people in their lives who've made them feel that way, but they're not.
Oh, interesting. Now, you've had your hand in a new book that was recently published. Can you tell us about it?
Sure, it was pretty exciting project hacky for me because like you never know how things are going to pan out, right? And I was in an accelerator for social entrepreneurs when I first started my business quite a while ago, and there were 8 businesses, and was myself and another business where it was just us. Everybody else had a team. And so he and I worked very closely together. His name is Paul McAllister, and he owns Monster House Publications. And so I was supporting this young man and his mom. Um, and one of the questions I had in my intake form is, "Do you have any unique gifts or passions?" And mom said that he really liked to draw and he liked to write. I always try to think low risk, maximum reward. Um, so I send me his stuff, and I asked, would you mind if I send this off to my friend, to my acquaintance? He owns a publishing company. Just no problem. Didn't think anything of it. I sent it to my friend, and he said, "Shawn, I want to publish this young man's book." And so it took about 3.5, 4 years from start to finish. But here we have a young man who struggled in school, struggled and every aspect of life, and now can call himself a published author. And that's the name of the book. It's called Trucks. I'll send you the link so that you can add it for the viewers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Boy, what's better than that to have such a positive effect on someone who then is going to have a positive effect on others? Really good stuff. How can our audience learn more about you?
My website, um, or reach out to me. I've kind of stopped posting on social media a whole lot, Hacky. Like I used to be really diligent about it, and so I guess the way I put it was, when I was broke, I had to find ways to kind of get myself out there. But now that I'm more financially secure, and because I've experienced burnout, I don't have capacity to do that stuff anymore. Um, but it's also challenging because I haven't found anybody who can market me as well as I can. So it's kind of this double-edged sword. But I would say, the website, or reach out to me. I kind of hold space to have conversations with people around the world. Like I set aside an hour or two a week, and if someone happens to reach out to me, then I'll say, hey, no problem, plug them in here and have a conversation with them. And it's been pretty
So
interesting how much.
let's recite for our audience your website and your email.
Sure. So my website is www.ddmacs.ca. So that's ddmax.ca. And my email is Shawn, SHAWN, at ddmacs.ca.
Okay, great, great. Is there one thing you've learned about yourself through getting a diagnosis?
Yeah, and I think, I touched on this and said we'd circle back to it, but I think the childhood trauma of I think when people think of trauma, they typically think of like one large event, but it isn't necessarily that way. For a lot of us, it's kind of the death of a thousand cuts. If you grew up in the, anytime before probably 2010, toxic masculinity was rampant. It's still rampant, right? So, looking back on my childhood and the disassociating that I did, right? It was my way of retreating. It was kind of like we weren't allowed to cry. Like if you were a boy or a man, I'm sure, the things that I'll say, Hacky, you've heard, boys don't cry, sissies cry, or I'll give you something to cry about, or, real men don't cry, or crying is weak, all of this, pardon my bullshit that we were fed and believed. And so we carried that with us. And so I realize or recognize now that the reason why I didn't have those meltdowns is because I didn't have permission to do that. And so I held it all in. So you can imagine all the stuff that's like pent up in here from having to hold all that in for all those many years. And so being able to have those meltdowns now and just have everything come out is pretty spectacular. I mean, I wouldn't wish them on anyone, but also I think that there aren't enough people who just are okay with crying. I think people try to fight it and hold it back, and we don't need to. I mean, I tell people you wouldn't hold back a laugh or a smile. Why would you do that with your other emotions? They're meant to be there. So why not feel them?
Well, it's very interesting, that point of view. And we need an outlet for such things. In my own life, my outlet was professional heavyweight boxing, where I could get it all out.
Hmm.
But the training and the fights, and overcome one of my big hang-ups, which was fear. And I experienced fear before every single fight, but then I had to overcome it to get in the ring and perform.
Right.
Not directly analogous, but your principle is very well received and very admirable, I might say, too. Now, you have children who are also neurodivergent. Can you tell us about that experience?
Yeah. So, it's one of these things, Hacky, where I always tell parents the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Because a lot of parents will come to me with their kids' assessment and diagnosis, right? And so then I I kind of scratch my head, saying, I wonder if they've had any aha moments, and they usually have. And so it wasn't really any that different from me, right? Like seeing my kids in certain ways, and so having them assessed and them both being neurodivergent, but also both being extremely different. My son is 16 and has ADHD combined type. Brilliant. Like just the fact that he doesn't struggle the way that I did, Hacky, brings me immense joy. Didn't bring a book home all last year. Finished with a 93%. At one point, he had 100% in 3 of his classes. Like
Wow.
it's just amazing how different things can be, right? And then we have my daughter, who is essentially a mini me, autistic, ADHD, and the things that I see her go through are very much the things that I went through. Difference being she has 2 parents who are very knowledgeable, intuitive, empathic, um, and we don't live in an age where we feel like we have to hide those things or be shameful of them. So she has a lot of love and support, and it's just kind of fascinating, right, to see how they are and the things that they go through, especially as someone who's not only neurodivergent but as a therapist who works with families and does a lot around parenting, and I can see the impact of the things my wife and I have done that have helped my kids out.
How do you think that those autism traits went undetected for so long?
Ah, um, well, again, living in a different place, I'm not the face of autism, Mackie. Um, I think that when people, and again, different here than in Florida where you are, here there's still very much a deficit-based mindset. disability is still synonymous with less than. And the reason why I don't want to say I don't play nice, but I've been shunned by every disability related organization in the province. They all follow me on social media, but none of them will ever share any of the work that I do. I make them look bad, and I'm okay with that. So I think part of it is that, me not being the face. So then what is the face? The face to them is someone who looks autistic, whatever that may look like. They envision someone with higher needs because that's going to pull on the heartstrings, right? They don't really want to hear about a successful autistic person story. That's just it's not how they get funding. It's just a weird kind of place that I'm in where being autistic and having to say that I'm autistic because otherwise people won't know, and trying to inform and educate them, but also living in the place where I'm at, you can see somebody's reaction in their face, right? They're either going to get it or they're not. And if they're not, you learn something about that dynamic of that conversation, of that relationship, that, you're not going to look at them the same way because they've judged you based on information that you felt vulnerable enough to share with them. So it is kind of an interesting conundrum. So I guess my role, as I see it, is just trying to be awesome, and anybody who wants to come along for the ride can. Anybody who doesn't, that's fine. You're going to be outdated and out of touch, but
Shawn, looking back at your childhood, did you see things that would have told you you have autism?
in hindsight, yeah. I mean, tags and clothes, putting on certain clothes but not feeling comfortable in them. That was a big one. Sounds, always being heightened. Definitely a lot, but also something that I've learned about myself is the rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is just another layer on top of that. If people don't know what that is, I'm happy to explain it. I'll explain it the same way I explained it to my doctor when I went to see him, and I introduced the concept to him. And the way I explained it to him was, if you were to text somebody and they didn't respond right away, what would be your thought process? And he said, well, I put my phone back in my pocket and I'd walk away and not really think anything of it. And I said, okay, that's the difference. I would replay the last interaction I had with that person and wonder if there's something that maybe I said or did that would have offended them, that caused them not to respond right away. And that's the process for each type of rejection we go through. Is our immediate thought is, what is it that we did that may have done something to harm the relationship and prevent that person from responding right away?
What is the term that you used?
Rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
Rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
Right.
Very
And so our mind will kind of skip off and create an alternative reality based on just wherever our mind takes us, and it's usually not positive.
Shawn, if you would, I'd like you to take us back in time, back when you were back in elementary and grammar school, and you were first recognizing that you were different. How did people respond, and how did you respond?
It was tricky because, again, like I was a kid. I don't know any better, right? I don't know that there's anything out there other than just being me. And so, the constant prompts eventually turn into negative, right? And this is something I'm aware of with my own kids, right? And it's not their fault. It wasn't my fault. And so the constant, right, of stay on task, do this, do that. But also it was part of the era too, Hacky, where people were more concerned about what the neighbors thought than they were about what was happening in their own home. And so, and I'm pretty sure I've said this before, like, my parents didn't have me assessed, not for the reasons I'd like to think. Back then, special education was like Hotel California. You could check in anytime you like, but you could never leave, right? And so my parents fought to keep me out of special education because they didn't want to be judged. Having a child with a disability at that time was perceived as a reflection of poor parenting. What must you have done to end up with a child like that? So the way that I kind of was able to put it into words later was that I felt like I was wrongly imprisoned in my own mind, is the best way that I can put it. And I would also say that with all of that baggage that came, there wasn't a day that I didn't think about what it would be like to not be on the planet.
And that's
So
what people forget. It's a different time. We go through different eras in civilization, and you can take that in any field or any sport or anything. It was a different time, and things are different now. Certain things are still the same, but certain things change. And sometimes that can be good, and sometimes it can be not so good. In the field of neurodivergence, I think it's been good because we're now more cognizant of it and more accepting and so on and so forth. But even that word accepting means, oh, something wrong with you. I'm accepting you, even though, and that's not what's intended.
no, but I always say, Hacky, like inclusion isn't a thing that you do; it's a way of being, right? If it's a thing that you're doing, like it shouldn't require effort.
Well, Shawn Smith, up there in Canada, it's been such a pleasure to have you here at Different Brains. I've certainly learned a lot, and I look forward to talking to you in the future as well. And keep up your good work in neurodivergence, ADHD, autism, and the whole rest of the lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hacky.
Exploring Different Brains is a production of Different Brains. Visit us at differentbrains.org.